I'm a pretty big Gamecube fan. Between the quality games and integrated handle, it's really hard to not like the not-so-cubic cube. That's why, when I saw an ad for Retro Fighters Gamecube controller clone, the BattlerGC, I didn't hesitate to add it to my shopping cart. And a few days later, here it is, in all its orange glory. But does this clone hold up against the prestige of the original? Let's find out. First impressions are often key as to whether or not a controller will last long in my hands, and if there's one thing the BattlerGC definitely gets right, it's the looks. I opted for this orange colorway, which I quite like, and a more traditional GameCube layout. They also have other typical GameCube colors available and a version with the left thumbstick and D-pad swapped. But hey, if I'm going for a GameCube controller, I want a GameCube controller. And for better or worse, this is what I imagine a modernized GameCube style Pro controller to probably look like. Unfortunately, the first downside comes with actually picking up the controller. It's incredibly light, to the point of actually feeling cheap. Plus, the feel of the shell's smooth plastic doesn't immediately give me a ton of confidence. Luckily, the face buttons are rather solid. I'm not the biggest fan of their rounded, shiny plastic design, but the ABXY buttons all give satisfying, responsive thunks when I spam them. Same goes for the shoulder buttons, which are fairly clicky. Although I really wish they'd made the shoulder buttons require the same amount of force across their full lengths. Instead, we have the awkwardness that we see with some of other cheap controllers, where it's easier to press them on the outside than the inside. Of course, no Hall effect sticks at this price point, but the sticks here do feel fairly smooth and come with an octagonal stick gate that adds quite a bit of tactile experience. I do appreciate just a little more resistance on my sticks typically, but they're more than serviceable here. Unfortunately, the same can't be said about the D-pad. Honestly, the D-pad is overly squishy in all directions and feels like it's where they cut costs the most for some odd reason. To be fair, the original GameCube controller's D-pad is beyond terrible, but I guess I prefer this to that, but that's basically saying that I want a D-pad that's technically usable. Both triggers are also another huge letdown. They're analog, which is great, but they have an oddly short travel and only really have resistance when depressed halfway. The result is buttons that bottom out way too quickly for my taste, while feeling awkward to make really precise inputs. Combined with the unsatisfying feeling of their flat, untextured paddles, it makes me really wish these GameCube clones would just adopt the original controller's linear triggers already. But I digress. Overall, I'd give the initial feel of this controller a solid like B or B-. The build is definitely cheap, but there's more than enough here that feels pretty decent and makes me not want to chuck it in the trash immediately. But what's it actually feel like to game on this? Well, it's an experience, let me tell you. The first thing to note is the awkward compatibility. This isn't a Bluetooth controller and requires a 2.4 GHz dongle to connect to anything. Unfortunately, that dongle doesn't seem to work well with either my Fold 4 or MacBook Pro. While the controller technically connects, it seems to only connect as controller 2 and doesn't register as an input device when I try to map controls in Dolphin. To be fair, Retro Fighters doesn't actually advertise Android or macOS compatibility. They do advertise Switch compatibility though, and I honestly had no luck at all getting that to work with the instructions provided in the box. The controller would seem to connect when I tried, but no inputs would register on the screen, so I don't know. Luckily, it works quite well with my desktop running Windows. Inputs mapped easily in emulators and registered automatically for Steam Big Picture mode. Although, whenever I did launch a game in Steam, I had to manually switch to Steam Input to get it working. A small hassle, but something to note. Playing Control actually didn't feel awful, once I got into the action. The GameCube layout felt surprisingly comfortable, and the controls felt solid for the half hour or so that I actually played. Switching over to Persona 4 Arena Ultimax was a different story altogether. The action buttons were great for mashing basic attacks before launching into a quick Persona smash, but my god, is this D-pad terrible! The low profile and squishy feel alone make it basically unusable for many titles like this. If it weren't obvious before, that small extra dose of incompatibility should ward you away from buying this as a standard wireless controller. Luckily, it has one final trick up its sleeve: GameCube compatibility. Another 2.4 GHz receiver comes packaged in the box, this one with a GameCube controller port. Connection is pretty much instantaneous, though I do have to tap the powering button every time I reset the console. Not too big a deal, to be honest. As many issues as I had connecting the controller elsewhere, GameCube games actually don't feel too bad. The layout is pretty much perfect for Mario Kart Double Dash. Holding down the A button while rolling my thumbs to use items is beyond comfortable. Using the left joystick in Super Monkey Ball 2 also felt extremely smooth and responsive. I kinda suck at the game overall, but small movements of the stick were registered in-game without an issue. If there are any dead zones to these sticks, they definitely weren't noticeable. Given that the original GameCube controller also has a crappy D-pad, my only real complaint using the BattlerGC as a GameCube controller has to be the triggers. If they're used as digital, like on-off inputs, like in Mario Kart, they're perfectly serviceable. However, they're horrendous for analog inputs. In Super Mario Sunshine, I found that I had to depress the right trigger halfway before any water started shooting out of FLUDD. It is something I could adjust to if I had nothing else. But given the already short range of the triggers being super annoying, I would really prefer something better. So yeah, don't buy the BattlerGC for a general multi-platform wireless controller. Compared to similarly priced controllers from, say, 8-Bit Do, the BattlerGC feels cheap, has a subpar D-pad, and is held back by underwhelming triggers. But as a cheap-ish wireless GameCube controller, I'd say there are definitely worse options on the market, and really no other option on the market if you prefer the more traditional form factor compared to a cheap Wavebird knockoff. Of course, if price isn't an issue, definitely splurge for an actual Wavebird. There's still really no wireless GameCube controller that beats it out. A quick eBay search shows that a working Wavebird receiver combo are going for around $90+ though, making the $45 BattlerGC look a little better if you're looking for a casual wireless solution for your GameCube. Just don't expect miracles going in. Those are my thoughts though. What are yours? Are you in the market for a wireless GameCube controller? Is there a different controller you'd recommend I look into next? Let me know down in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to give this video a like if you found it helpful or informative. Also, be sure to get subscribed for other controller and video game tech reviews in the future. That's gonna be all for this video though. Until next time, catch you later.